All right, we're working on tutorial 12, case problem 2, substinence. It's pretty funny. It's a sub sandwich store called Substinence. I like it. Um, I have the completed assignment right here, and I don't know what we're supposed to be doing yet, so I'm not sure what part to look at just yet. So let's get our area situated here. First thing I always like to do is I'm going to open up my HTML file, and I like my HTML file to be on the left. I don't know why. I'm going to click this link over here, open this up in a new browser tab. So here is my uh, unedited page next to my fully finished page. I'm guessing we're going to be adding stuff to the cart. I'm not sure yet. But now that I have this open in a new tab, I can slide this over, get it off of my screen. I can also click here on the file tree, get that off of my screen, and really maximize the real estate available for my code and also for my instructions. And speaking of instructions, I am always going to read my summary of instructions because I treat these assignments just as I would if I were doing a real life project. I need to know a little bit about the client and what their needs are, what they're looking for, in order to give them the best of me that I can. And so let's get started with that. Substinence. Maria Torres manages the website for Substinence, a popular chain of sandwich shops located in southern Indiana. She has asked you to work on the interface for the store's shopping cart. Maria has supplied you with a web page highlighting the store's daily specials. She would like customers to be able to add items to the shopping cart by clicking a button next to the item description. Once the button is clicked, then the description and image are added to a shopping cart panel located on the right side of the page. The shopping cart should keep a running total of the number of each item ordered. Okay, so the shopping cart over here. So I have the finished one. I'm going to click on a couple of sandwiches. I like a salmon sandwich. That sounds interesting. And there it is, appeared right there. I have one to my order. If I click on another one, it just adds two. It doesn't add another one below. That's pretty good. Pretty good. Um, let's also get a salami sandwich. All right, we got that. Let's just click on all of them. All right, what happens if I get a really long list? All right, I see like the background is getting a little lighter, and that's because things are going on down the page. And if I keep clicking on, so it isn't getting longer now, I'm just going to start adding to the order. And then if I submit order, nothing happens then. That's above and beyond what this assignment is all about. We're primarily concerned with taking information from here. If I were to click on shaved salmon, add to order, it takes that shaved salmon, gets the image, the name, the description, and how many have been added to the order, and applies it to here. And if I were to click it again, it's going to somehow know how to find out that it's already been added once and to just add to the count. So pretty cool, pretty cool. And you can see that our current one does nothing. Right, I've not done anything with this code yet. Right, so we have a few different sandwiches and then the same or similar things in bagel form. We don't have all of them exactly the same. That's okay. And Julius Caesar, of course, he would conquer the world for a good sandwich. I mean, if it's a good sandwich, it's a good sandwich. Okay, so instructions, yada, yada, yada. Basically what I've just done. They tell you to read through your things every time, and I always do anyway because I am just good like that. All right, so we have our CSS. We don't have JavaScript we don't have a script element in the head tag of our HTML, which means we're going to have to add it. That's probably going to be step 1. Linking the JavaScript file, step 1. It's amazing. All right, so user editor to open this, add your name and date into everything. All right, I'm not going to add it into everything. What is the date? The 6th today. All right, go to the submanual HTML in your editor, add a script element to the document head for the subcart JavaScript file. Load it asynchronously. All right, remember asynchronously means that our script is going to get downloaded simultaneously while the page loads, but then once the script gets downloaded, finishes downloading, then it will pause parsing of the HTML and execute the JavaScript instead. So that means that the JavaScript, this is the fastest way for the first load because you're going to download 2 things at the same time, or the user is. However, the JavaScript is still going to freeze the page while it loads, and so we can't assume that our page has been loaded yet, and we won't be able to run JavaScript code without doing something about an onload event and waiting for our page to actually finish. So, all right, that's all we're going to do on this step. Great. Let's move along. Now we have the JavaScript in there. I'm sure nothing changed because this is our JavaScript file. We just have a couple of empty functions. I'm not going to bother looking at our page just yet. Okay, return to the JavaScript file. Here we are. Add an event listener that runs setupcart function when the page is loaded. Okay. Now it says add an event listener, and I do want to add event listener. In previous assignments, we would do window.onload equals, and then we would do the setupcart function without parentheses. And this works. The downside is if there was already an onload function set, if there was already a function set to the onload event, this would override that, and then both things wouldn't happen. So what we're going to do instead is get rid of that, and we're going to do window.add event listener, and we're going to add an event listener. The first argument for this method is what event are we interested in, and that's going to be a string, all in lowercase, so load, and then we're going to put in the setupcart function as the second argument. Again, we're not going to use parentheses on this function. If we did that, what would happen is this function would get called immediately. It would expect a return value, and then it would set that return value to the event. That's not what we want to set. We want to set the function itself, the event. And so we reference the name of the function, but we don't actually call the function. So that's the first step. Pretty easy step. All right. Now let's move on to the next step. We're actually going to start working with our function. And I'm going to hit that a couple of times. Let's see if I can. No, I can't zoom my code up at all, so I hope you can read it. I'm unable to zoom. At least I don't know how to. Oh, there we go. I do know how to. Zoom that a little bit. Okay. Create the setupcart function. The purpose of this function is to define the event handlers for the add to order buttons on the page. So this means that these add to order buttons in our setupcart function, we're going to make these buttons, we're going to give them the action that they need. Okay? Because right now they do nothing, so we're going to make them do something. Add the following commands to the function. Create a variable named addButtons, which contains the collection of elements belonging to the addButton class. So a variable called addButtons, and it is going to equal what is this? The collection of elements belonging to the addButton class. So we would do document dot get elements by class name, and that class name is the addButton class. Alright, so now the addButtons variable is equal to an array with all of the elements on the page which have the addButton class name. Alternatively, I could do query selector all and do query selector. I'm going to try that actually. My answer key has this, but I'm going to write query selector all and do the class name addButton. So we write it just like we're doing a CSS selector, dot for class name and addButton. And this should return exactly the same thing as getElements by class name, except that I really like the query selector all because it works the same way CSS selectors work, and I like that. So I'm going to put that in there. Hopefully, depending on the way MindTap tests me, it won't look for me to use that specific method. If it does, I'll have to change it back. All right, but I'm going to do it this way so that you can see whether or not it works to do it that way yourself. See what kind of flexibility we get from MindTap. Loop through the addButtons collection, and for each button, add an event handler that runs the addItem function. That's this function down here. It runs the addItem function when the button is clicked. So we need to loop through all of them. That's going to be a for loop. Okay, there's my empty for loop. For var I equals 0, that's my loop iterator. It's going to start at 0 because arrays start at 0. And then so long as I remains less than the addButtons.length, that's how many elements are in my array. As long as I is less than that, I'll keep doing the loop. And every time the loop iterates, I will increment I. I'm going to do the prefix increment because I was told that it actually works a little bit faster. Probably not in JavaScript. It does it in C++ after it gets compiled, but I'm starting to get in the habit of doing things that way. So I'm going to do that. And then inside this loop, what we need to do is add the event handler that runs the addItem function when the button is clicked. And so I could do onClick equals, I could do the addButtons of sub I and set the onClick, but I'm actually going to do add event listener like I did before. So add buttons, that's the variable that has the array, right? And then the index of the array is I as I go through the loop, and then add event listener. I'm going to do just like I did with the window load event. I'm going to add event listener for the click event and set that equal to the addItem function. That's the addItem function. Great. And let's see if I can get that. I've done two things a little bit differently than MindTap would. Ooh. And it doesn't like that. Create the setupcart function. Click attribute for addButtons. Let's see what they're looking for. I don't have a typo, do I? Because that would... No, that's good. Well, I guess this add event listener is not what they're looking for. So I'm going to do the on click event is equal to the add item function. Remember, no parentheses when you're adding a function to an event. Add buttons, add buttons. All right, let's see if that is what they want. They don't want me to use add event listener in that case. And there we go. And that's it. And so the reason is when they are checking it, they're checking that the click event for add buttons is equal to the add item function, but when you do add event listener, your event is going to be equal to whatever the default nothingness is in addition to the add item function. And so those things aren't exactly the same, and it doesn't get set equal in as far as MindTap is concerned. Okay, so I could not use the add event listener and also get this check mark at the same time. However, I could use the query selector all, even though the MindTap was expecting me to use getElements by class name. Those do return exactly the same thing, so I'm allowed to do that. I'm trying to show you the amount of flexibility you have. You do have a little bit. Next, create the add item function. So moving down to the add item function, I'm going to create a little bit more space so that I can get this at the top of my screen so we can focus on that. Add the following commands to the function. The description of the food item is the next sibling element to the button that was clicked by the customer. It just occurs to me that we did not look through these items to see how they were formed. So we have a section called items, and inside of it is each of the items. So here's one item, and I'm going to separate it visibly. All right, so it's a div of class menu item. It has an input of class add button. That's a thing that we just added our event to. Next to that, we have div with item 0. Next one is item 1, so these are just numbered. Inside the div tag is an image and an h1 that is the title, and a p tag that is a description, and another p tag that has the price. Right, so this is the format of each of these sandwich items that we'll be looking for. Right, so as we come through here, the description of the food item is the next sibling element to the button that was clicked by the customer. So this is the button, and the description of the food item, I guess they named this entire div tag. It is the next sibling. That's what this entire one is. So use the nextElementSibling property to reference the next sibling element to the target of the event object. Store the sibling element in a variable food item. Okay, so what they're saying is all the add buttons, which are all these input of class add button, right? When they get clicked, we call the add item function. We have the event object as the parameter here. So when we're in there, we can use e.target to reference the element which caused the event to happen, the target of the event. And so we can use e.target.nextElementSibling to then get a reference to the next element sibling of that button, this div tag right here. And then we can go inside of that to get all this other information. So that's what we're going to do in here. So they want this one to be called food item. So var food item equals, like I just said, e dot target dot next element sibling. And don't forget your semicolon. Okay, so the event target, which is the add button, next element sibling will be this div tag, and that's what we're going to set to the food item variable. All right, next we're going to create the food ID variable, which contains the value of the ID attribute for food item. So food item, food ID is this ID, item 0 in this case. So var food ID with a capital D equals food item dot get attribute, and the attribute that we want to get is the ID attribute. Remember, that's lowercase because it's also lowercase in here. If it was typoed and was written as uppercase in here, we would still write it as lowercase, because once the HTML has been processed by the browser, it's going to correct things like that. Right, so that's going to be lowercase. Here we go. Next, we're going to clone this node. Very cool. All right, we've not done that one yet. Clone the node, which is going to make a copy of the node. It's going to make a copy of this node div tag with ID item 0. It's going to make a copy of it. I don't know that it's going to copy the ID. It shouldn't. Let's have a look in our inspector on the finished solution. It does not copy the ID. Item 2, shade salmon, ID is item 2, does copy the ID, even though it really shouldn't copy the ID, because we should not have more than one object, more than one element on a page with the same ID. So it does copy the ID, and apparently we are not accounting for that in this assignment. And so we're going to use the cloneNode method to create a copy of the food item element, that's the div tag, and all of its descendants. Store this node structure in the food description variable. So we're going to create a new variable called food description. Let's start there. Food description, and that equals food item dot clone node. Right, so cloneNode makes a copy of it, and cloneNode actually takes an argument. It's a Boolean true or false argument on whether you want to also clone all the content elements, or the internal elements, or if you just want to clone the element itself and not all of its contents. In this case, we do want to clone all of its descendants, so we're going to pass true as the argument. Okay, moving along. The shopping cart is stored in an aside element. Yes, it is. We have the aside element. That's the shopping cart. This aside element has the ID of cart. Store the reference to this element in a variable named cartbox. So a new variable called cartbox equals document, typos all over, document dot get element by ID, and the ID is cart. All right, so I have a reference to the place where we're going to put all of our information. the shopping cart needs to determine whether a product ordered by a customer has already been ordered. So just like I did when I was testing this out, if I keep clicking a lot of shaved salmons because I want to get salmon sandwiches to the fire department down the street, then it needs a way to know that shaved salmon already exists over here and to just add to the number that is that. So to do this, we'll add a span element to the top of each item in the cart containing the number of items each product ordered and update that value when a product order is repeated. Do the following to create the order counter for each substinence product. So this part is really just describing what we're going to do in the next step here. So let me give a little bit of a space. All right. Create a variable named duplicate order. And set it equal to an initial value of false. Equals false. That was easy. Next, loop through the elementChild nodes of cartbox. For each node, determine whether the ID of the element node equals the ID of the food ID. That's why we're leaving the IDs in place. Okay. If it does, the customer has previously placed that menu item in the cart, and we're going to increase the value of the firstElementChild of the node by 1 to indicate an additional order and then break out of the for loop. Okay, so we didn't add the span yet, but we didn't add the span yet. Oh, okay, I gotcha. We're doing this a little bit out of the order that I would have thought we did it, but it does make sense now that I look ahead. Okay, so we're going to do this and then carry on. I'll trust them. All right, so we're going to loop through all the elementChild nodes of cartbox. Excuse me. So remember, we can use a familial reference to loop through the nodes. And that way, if there's a lot, and of course in our case there could only possibly be up to 8, that's how many sandwiches are on here, but in the event there's a lot, like in previous example, there was hundreds of things to loop through on a page, and we don't want to count all of them every loop, so we want to use the familial for loop. And let's go over what that is. So var n, we're going to loop through all the nodes, all the child nodes of the cartbox. So the first setting, var, the first node is going to be set to cartbox dot first element node. Okay, we don't want to call it firstChild because we only are concerned with element nodes that might be in it. So we're going to call it firstElementNode, and then we're going to keep going through this loop as long as n as long as n is not equal to null. And then to iterate every time, we're going to say n is equal to n, that's the node n, the node that we're looking at. When we iterate through, we're going to say n equals nextElementSibling. And for some reason, my answer key has the second and third parameter in my for loop swapped. I don't know why. Let's put it the right way, the way I have it. All right. And inside this loop, we need to determine whether the ID of the node element that we're looking at is the same as the ID that we have already gotten in the food ID. All right, so if node.id n.id is exactly equal to food ID, which is the ID of the the node that we got on the node that we're already working with. So we're going to loop through everything in the cart, assuming there's already things in the cart. And if there's nothing in the cart, then this loop doesn't even take place. So inside the loop, we're going to increase that value of the first, increase the value of the first element child of the node by 1. So the node that we're looking at, it's going to have a span put into it. And we haven't put it in yet, and that's okay. Node first element child will become a span dot text content plus plus. We'll just increment it. We could do equals itself plus 1, yada yada. And then we're going to break out of the for loop. We're only going to do this once because there only could possibly be one. So break. Did I miss something? Yeah, all right. So it doesn't specifically say this, but we made this variable duplicate order, and if the ID of the node in the cart is equal to the ID of the node that we're trying to add to the cart, it is a duplicate order. So duplicate order equals true. Right? And then we break out of the loop. Right? After the loop is completed, so down here, let me fix my spacing. Down here, test whether the duplicate order is still false. And so here, this should clue you in, hey, I never set the duplicate order to true. We got to remember to do that over here. Right? If duplicate order is still false, equals false. Right? We could use the triple equals as well. Right? MindTab likes to use the triple equals a lot. So this is why we were allowed to increment that span before it existed, because we're only going to do this if there are already duplicates. Okay, so if these things are already duplicated, then we're going to increment that. If they're not already duplicated, this never happens, and we just continue on and check and see, hey, if they're not already duplicated, then we're going to come in and add that span. That's what we're going to do here. All right. If it's still false, it means if it's not a duplicate item, then we're going to create a variable called order count, storing a span element node. Set the text content of the order count element to 1, because the first time will always be 1. Insert order count as the first child of the food description node, structure, and append food description to cartbox as the new product order. So it sounds a bit more complicated than it is. Let's go through. First, we're going to do var order count equals document dot create element, and we're going to create that span element. like they told us a couple steps ago. They said, hey, we're going to create a span, remember? So now we're going to create a span element. It's just a document fragment right now. It doesn't exist anywhere but memory at the moment. Okay. Set the content of that element to 1. So order count dot text content equals 1. And we're going to set it to the string 1 because we want to make sure that we're dealing with strings in this case. Right. Then insert order count as the first child of the food description node. So the way we can insert as the first child, we can't do appendChild because that makes it the new last child. It just adds it to the end, append. Right? So what we can do is, this is for the food description element. Remember, food description is the new clone that we just made. We have not added it to the page yet. Okay? Food description dot, we do insert before. All right, and insert before takes 2 arguments. The first argument is the new thing that we want to insert, and what we want to insert is the order count that we just created, this span, order count. And where we want to insert it is we want to make it the new first child. So we want to insert it before the current first child. So we can do food description dot first child, or we could say firstElementChild. Right. And then we want to append that food description. This is the thing that we cloned. Right. We want to append that to the cart box and put it in the cart box. So cartbox dot append child, and the child we want to append is the food description object. So quickly, let's go back through this, We've the element that triggered the event is the add to cart button, right? Or add to order button. And then if we look at our HTML, that's this button right here. Okay, the next sibling is this div with an ID, and it holds all that stuff. So our food item is equal to the next sibling of the target. Right? So now we have a reference to the food item. The food ID is the ID of the food item. We'll need that later. Food description, this is what we're going to create, and we're going to add it to the cart box on the right-hand side over here, all on the right-hand side. All right, we're going to clone, do a true full clone with all of its children content of the food item that we just found. We made a clone of that. So we're going to just, if I do another shaved salmon, I'm fully going to clone the contents of this and put it over here on the right-hand side. Cart box, that's our destination on the right-hand side. Okay, we're going to assume that the first time is not a duplicate order. We're going to loop through everything in the cart box and see if there is a duplication. Okay, if the ID of everything in the cart box, one at a time, we'll look through them. If that ID matches the ID of the attribute, that means it's already there. Okay, and if it's already there, that is a duplicate. And that assumes that this is not the first time somebody pressed the button. It couldn't be if it's already there. Okay, so if it is already there, we can say, yes, true, it is a duplicate order. And we're just going to increment the number that's in there. And so we're going to increment this number. And actually, if I were to inspect this span, it only actually has the number 2 in it. And the word orders is in the after. It's done by CSS. How cool is that? All right. And then there's only every time somebody clicks this, it's only going to be 1. So we can break out of the loop after we find one that's true, because there's never going to be 2 that's true. We're only adding one thing at a time. So we can break out of the loop, make it a little bit more efficient, so we won't keep running through the loop. And then if the duplicate order is still false, which means we never found a duplicate and set it to true, okay? If there is no duplicate already in existence, now we're going to put it in there. And before we put it in there, we're going to add that span, put the number in the span, and then we're going to put that span, insert it into the beginning of the object, into the beginning of the node, and then we're going to just append that whole thing into the cart box. So the only time we append it is assuming that we haven't already found a duplicate. So that's why we're kind of, it seems like we're doing things backwards. We're checking for duplicates before we're putting it in. And that's because on the first time somebody clicks, of course, there's never going to be any duplicates. And so it seems kind of weird that we would check for duplicates. But every other time after the first click, there could be duplicates. And so we want to check for duplicates first. And having found no duplicates, then we add the item to the cart. Okay, so I should be able to get a check mark on that, unless I have some typo somewhere. I think I'm pretty good. No! Oh my goodness. I only got 4 out of 7. Let's see. Store the element found by nextElementSibling in a variable fooditem. Oh, I do have a typo. Here we go. nextElementSibling. And of course that typo was right at the beginning, so it probably did all the other broken things I had in here. Oh, no, that didn't fix everything. All right. Correctly increments the text content of the order count for duplication. So this is the incrementation, firstElementChild, text content, plus plus. Now, they do have this thing switched in my answer key, but I don't like that. firstElementChild. Okay, I have a couple of errors here. One, and I already corrected that. For some reason, I have firstElementNode instead of firstElementChild. And also my appendChild down here, I have to make sure that's camel case. But most importantly, and we'll see if I refresh my page, it is totally borked, right? That's a technical term, borked. That's an industry term. Okay, and some of you may have noticed early on, I put my script in, and I didn't include the slash in the closing tag. So I borked the whole thing. If I had run this earlier to check it, I would have noticed it right away. So here we are. That's fixed. And I want to come in. I think I'll get my check mark now. I think so. So the reason I wasn't getting all the checks is because when I get down here, it was checking to see if values were the correct values. And since nothing was running at all, it didn't do that. Did not work at all. So that is working now. And let's have a look at if I put some sandwiches in there. It's working. All right, we'll put a veggie sandwich in because I know we got some vegetarians watching. All right, get a couple of let me get a couple more veggie sandwiches. Take one home with you. All right, that looks pretty good. I think we might be done. Let's go to the last page. It says verify. I just went to the page and looked at it. I don't do the validate at the W3C validator. It's out of date. It has been for a couple of years, so we're not going to run that. It says build the website button in the bottom right corner, but I always open in a new tab anyway. So if I click all these, it is going to work, and it's just going to add. Somebody's really hungry into having 37 salami bagel sandwiches. All right, and so we have completed this assignment. All right, there we go. I did have to look into my console in order to debug, but I didn't want to clog up the video with me debugging. I should have. It only took a few minutes, actually. Here, let me fix this, or unfix this appendChild, leave that typo in there, and then when I rerun the page, all right, and I'm going to open up my inspector, open up my console, and click on a salami sandwich, and every time I click on it, it just adds to the counter that cartbox.appendChild with a lowercase c is not a function. Right? So while you're checking your code to see if it works or doesn't work or how it works, open up your console in the editor of your browser. Currently I'm using Chrome. I use it for these assignments. Normally I use Firefox for other things. I just like it. It looks pretty similar though in the console, and it's going to tell you where the error is. It's going to tell you what the error is, and oftentimes it will tell you, oh, the error is on line 57. So I come into my code, look at line 57, and there it is. There's my error. Okay, and so uppercase C so that I can have camel case in my code, refresh the page, and now if I click that, I won't get that error anymore. Okay, that was tutorial 12, case problem 2, Substinence. I would conquer the world I would conquer the whole world for a good sandwich. Julius Caesar. He didn't say that. Sandwiches were invented in his time.